Marie never got tired of hearing about the royal family. Not that I mingled much in that circle, but I had met the Queen once and shaken her hand. And I had been inside the palace, writing on a guest invitation because of Marissa. Sir John Robert's children had always been welcomed guests in the royal family's home. And the prince, she asked me, have you seen him? Only his picture. He's been away somewhere at school, but his face is plastered all over Oddleton right now. You can't go anywhere without seeing him on television or the newspapers or magazines. And will the young Eastons, them that are in Oddleton, will they be attending the crowning? Marissa may, but Timothy is back home, I said, guessing the news of Timothy's mysterious crime hadn't reached her ears yet. Although I wouldn't be surprised if he went back in time to see it. If Timothy managed to survive the next few days, surely he'd have to go back to Oddleton. That was where the seal belonged. I'd finished sorting my seeds and found myself thinking about Timothy yet again. Why had Timothy brought the seal here? Everyone knew the seal was a historic part of the coronation. So why remove it so far from its home? Wouldn't it have been better to hide it somewhere in the West? I felt the uncomfortable pangs of doubt returning. And what brought Timothy back, she asked. Oh, some business, I said, reaching out to touch the geraniums on her windowsill. It didn't have anything to do with the fact that your birthday is this Saturday. I smiled to myself. No, Marie, he isn't here for me. And does that make you sad? Sad? Of course not. I stopped making plans for Timothy and me years ago. But my voice trailed off as I thought about my recent interview with Aunt Esme. She picked up a fresh white paper packet and put it away in the wooden box at her elbow. Why? Not you too, I said, laughing softly. Just because everyone else thought it was a brilliant, not to mention a very convenient idea, I didn't think you'd be on their side. You and Gerard found one another by yourselves. No one arranged for you to love each other. Did you really think Timothy and I would suddenly wake up one day and decide we were perfect for each other? It wasn't because of the contract that I thought you might choose Timothy, she said, looking perplexed as she straightened the paper envelopes in the box. It was because Timothy was the only young person you didn't pretend with. Now I was perplexed. What do you mean? You were like that little doll you carried around with a painted smile. I saw it even from a distance, and everyone loved you like a doll. But with Timothy, when you two would come and visit me, you seemed more like a real child, not afraid to be yourself. I felt a strange buzz in my head. I've never been afraid to be myself. You've never been afraid of being brave, but you were always afraid of being afraid. Only not with Timothy. You trusted him, that was plain enough, and right you were, because Timothy never did a thing what wasn't gentle around you, for all his loud ways with the others. That was the reason I thought you would someday choose his hand after all. But he doesn't love me, I said under my breath. What did you say, dear? She asked, leaning forward. I should probably go, I said. I haven't even said hello to my mother yet today. She smiled at me. Thank you for coming. You always bring the sun with you. I kissed her once more and then ran from the cottage. I was trembling from the inside out, even though the sun was shining. I felt cold. Could Marie be right? Had I been pretending to the world? I stopped at the corral gate and leaned on the post. From here I could see the shadows of the clouds gliding across the farmland in the valley below. The sharp contrast of lights and darks made me feel all jumbled up inside. Why couldn't it be all sunny or all gray? I could stand it if it was one or the other, but both made me feel oddly anxious. Miss Lisbette! I turned back to the house and saw Trudy waving at me from the mouth of the hedgerow. Your uncle is looking for you, miss. Even as she spoke the words, the shadows that had been in the distance suddenly caught up to me. With the sun gone so abruptly, a new chill swept over me. I pulled my cloak tighter around me and started back up the path to the house. I found my uncle at his desk, shuffling through several bills. When I appeared at the door, he said, Ah, there you are. Where have you been all day? I went riding. I don't like you riding for hours by yourself. I've told you that before. I almost informed him that I hadn't been alone, but then I decided it was better that he didn't know. Trudy said you wanted me? He adjusted the spectacles on his nose. Sir John Robert has sent word that he desires us to dine with his family this evening. I'm sure he wishes to discuss this whole business of the King's Guard with me. I'd be happy if we could leave as soon as you're ready. I hesitated. Was this the time to confess, now when the family was just about to go somewhere that we all enjoyed? If bad news was to be broken, wasn't it best said in the daylight and not under the influence of the black, unforgiving night? Was there something else, Lisbette? Yes, actually. Could it not wait till later? I am anxious to go. Oh, to be sure, I said, snatching cowardly at this reprieve. We can talk of it later. He gave me a brief nod and turned back to his papers, and I was dismissed. I turned around and started down the hall. Twice I nearly turned back for the study, and both times I stopped myself. There was no possible chance Clays could be home before tomorrow night, and those were still generous odds. I had at least until then. I stopped at my mother's room and was pleased to see her sitting up talking to Jane. As soon as they saw me, Jane chastised me. Where have you been? Your first day back and you disappear. You didn't even say goodbye this morning. I went for a ride. Jane studied my face. I think you might have gotten too much sun. Are you feeling all right? Jane's right, Mother said. You look pale. I touched my face. Oh, it was a bit warm outside, but I'm all right. Really, I am. Are you sure? She pressed. I made myself smile. I'm always all right, aren't I? It's you I'm worried about. Is the fire too warm? She relaxed. Oh, no. Jane always keeps it just right for me. You'd better go see if you can help Anne, Jane said. She's moaning in her room because she thinks she has nothing to wear tonight. I found Anne kneeling down beside the chest at the foot of her bed. Anne's room was nearest to the nursery, even though the nurse had been dismissed 2 years ago. There were still dolls lying on the seat below the window, but on her vanity was a clutter of creams, paints, and brushes. I went straight to the vanity and picked up some rouge. Anne, I teased, does Uncle William know you have this? No, and if you tell him, I'll hate you forever, she said tearfully over the dress in her hands. I put down the rouge and knelt by her side. Oh, don't cry, sweetheart. We'll find something for you to wear. I've tried not to complain, she said, wiping her eyes, but all my dresses are too short now. We've let them out as far as they'll go, and I still look ridiculous. What am I supposed to do? You're such a goose. Didn't you know I'd lend you something? Will you? I mean, I know you probably would if I asked you, but I can't keep asking, you know. Of course you can. We'll just share until we can buy you some new things. Do you think that might be soon? She asked hopefully. If you keep growing, we'll have no choice, will we? Oh, don't even joke about that. An hour later, we were all crowded into the covered carriage. I was in my usual place by the window because I could never get in a carriage or a car unless I was seated by the window. Mother had stayed home under Trudy's watchful eye, which meant that there was room for Lawrence to ride with us. I wished wholeheartedly that he had ridden his horse instead. In his corner next to Aunt Geraldine, he sat snickering at Anne, because even though the dress I had lent her fit her lengthwise, she didn't quite fill out the chest yet. It made me even angrier when neither of his parents interjected to make him stop. If I wasn't so desperate to stay in Uncle William's good graces, I would have said something properly scathing. Instead, I merely tried to change the subject. I turned to Jane and said, I didn't know you'd been ill lately. Startled, she said, Ill? Haven't you been having headaches? John Bigby gave me some medicine this morning, saying you needed it. It's in my purse back home. Have you been ill? At once I knew I'd said the wrong thing. Jane turned fearfully to look at everyone else in the carriage. Yes, I have. Aunt Geraldine narrowed her eyes. Headaches? Just now and then, Jane explained hurriedly. I mentioned it to Dr. Horner in the village the other day. Dr. Horner? Uncle William snapped. Why would you do that? He's not our physician. Oh, Jane said, her voice shaking. I was picking up something at the apothecary for Mother. I forget what. He and Mr. Bigby were just being friendly. I didn't ask for the medicine. Honestly, I didn't. And who will pay for these pills? Uncle William demanded. Who does Dr. Horner think he is, going around prescribing second-hand remedies without consulting the head of the family? He leaves me no choice but to pay him a visit and have a word or two. Please, no, Jane begged. I'll send the pills back. He was just being kind, I'm sure. Please don't make a fuss about it. It was just... Enough, Uncle William said, cutting her off. I will visit the doctor tomorrow morning, and that will be the end to this discussion. In the meantime, if you continue to feel ill, we will send for Dr. Blake. I'll have no country doctor inflating his ego by attempting to secretly diagnose his betters. Jane dropped her eyes to her lap, miserable. For the rest of the ride, we traveled in silence. My side of the carriage was veiled in mutual depression. Jane spent the remainder of the trip clinging to her fingers, while Anne kept trying to smooth the front of her bodice without being obvious. I leaned my head on the side of the carriage and wondered to myself if the day could get any worse. But as we pulled into the courtyard of Steedsley, my spirits couldn't help but lift, and when I saw Sir John Roberts standing outside to meet us, I jumped out of the carriage without waiting for Edgar to lift me out. A smile lit up Sir John Roberts' face as soon as he saw me, and he hurried down the steps from the door. I'm back, I cried, throwing my arms around him. He let me hug him and then took my shoulders and held me away from him so that he could see my face. Why, William, he said to my uncle, where is the little girl we set off to college? Surely this lovely creature is some other person. I laughed and said, Where's Lady Caroline? Inside, warning the boys to behave, he replied with a twinkle in his eye. You may have heard that we took on a ward this last fall. He's as bad as the rest of them. Then I don't want to meet him. I didn't come here to be teased this evening. He laughed. Don't worry. I'll protect my Blackwood girls. Then his smile faded and his voice lowered. My dear, before we go in, I must tell you something. My heart jumped hard in my chest, and I searched his face for signs of bad news. Yes? He opened his mouth, but he paused at the sound of horses. We all turned around to see who was coming up the drive, and saw a large group of soldiers. George Hargrove was in the front.